All right, guys, we are now going to go ahead and take a look at residuals. So previously we have gone ahead and you should have seen clips of videos in which we have created the scatter plot and we've gone ahead and gotten the linear regression equation and we've seen it inserted onto our actual scatter plot graph as well in our previous videos. Now we're going to take a look at how do we go ahead and calculate residuals. How do you then graph those actual residuals? And then essentially that's kind of where this gets a little bit harder. You got to ask yourself, what are they really asking me for? You might be asked to calculate the actual standard deviation here, and there are going to be certain steps that you need to complete, which means you're going to be completing steps 4 and step 7 found on your recipe card. And if we were just to calculate those residuals and graph those residuals, that would be step 4. This does say 3, but this should be step number 6 to graph those residuals. So we've got a couple of things going on here. But previously we went ahead and got our regression equation, and we went ahead, if I go ahead and trace it, we see it's traced onto our problem. Well, now how do you take a linear equation graph and our scatter plot and transform it into essentially this at the very end? Now this is because we're trying to see, is a linear equation actually going to be appropriate? And so to do that, we have to, in order for it to be appropriate, your value residuals need to be random and without a pattern on what's called a residual plot. These are 3 examples of residual plots. The only time it is appropriate is when it in fact is random, which we see as the first option. If it follows a pattern, it will not be appropriate. And if it kind of clumps together and again kind of is not again random, then it's not going to be appropriate as well. So let's start to go through. We have the following screen from what we just did previously, and now we're going to go ahead and calculate the residuals. So I'm going to press Stat. It says to go ahead and highlight Edit. So Edit is already highlighted, so I'm going to press Enter. Now here, where is this is important? It says move over to column L3, and we're going to go up to Highlight. So move over to column L3, and then notice it says up arrow highlight L3. So I literally am going to highlight L3. I'm going to press second stat list. So second stat list. And then you're going to see I have 7 there, which says resid for our residuals. So I'm going to go down to residuals, press 7 or go down to it. I'll highlight it here for video purposes. I'm going to press enter, and it says press enter twice. So I've pressed it once. I've now pressed it twice. It's gone ahead and it has calculated the residuals. Okay, so basically it's saying here that if you have a positive residual, it means that it's going to be above the regression line. Here we've got a small little chunk of positives. And then anytime we see a negative residual, it means it's going to be below the regression line. So once we've done this, we're actually going to go in the order of calculating residuals and calculate the standard deviation here. So I'm going to continue on. So these are steps 4 from our recipe card, step 4. And we would be jumping to step number 7 here on our recipe card. So again, 4 and 7 to calculate that. So back to our notes. To calculate standard, we're going to press Stat again. So Stat, we're going to go over to Calc. I want 1 var stat. Now here is where things change a little bit. Notice it says 1 var stats, press second 3 for L3. This is important because every time we have done this previously, we just use L1, what is already there. But we need to change that. So I'm going to press second, and I'm change that to L3. Now here is what I'm going to point out. I just changed which list to look at. It is saying look at that list of L3. Please be careful when you do any other type of information or any other problem. Make sure which list are you actually comparing. So I want list L3. I'm going to press enter all the way to the bottom. And now I'm going to write the values for summation of x squared and n. So I only want those 2 values. So I'm looking for your essentially e x squared equals 27,980. I'm going to write out that full value here. So I'm looking for ex squared or summation of x squared. And I want n equals. Always write both of these down. Do not commit anything to memory. Now I'm going to take that information and notice it says next step to calculate the standard deviation, you're going to divide it by n minus 2. So I'm going to actually do that, show you. I'm going to go ahead and clear out. And now I'm going to type in, I have 27,980. This is why you actually write this out to 0.586. And then I'm going to divide that by, and again, you'll notice in my notes I have parentheses. Again, there is a reason to my madness. 18 was my value of n, minus 2. Close it out. Looks right. Press enter. Notice I get 1,748.786475. Okay. Now, again, we still want the standard deviation, so I'm only going to press caret. Remember, your caret's right here. And it's to the half power, so 0.5, which we've dealt with before. We're just writing answer 0.5. Hit enter. And now there is your standard deviation, 41.818. We're rounding to 3 decimal places like we normally do. Now let's say I want to go ahead and from those residuals, I want to go ahead and graph the residuals to know, is that linear equation actually appropriate that we actually got from earlier? So we're now going to take a look at second stat plot. So second stat plot, this is where, again, why it is so important. This currently says we are comparing with plot 1 on L1, list 1, and list L2. Now remember, we want residuals. Since we want residuals, those were located and found, and I'll quickly go to that list. Those were found in L3 as your residuals. So notice here, we are going to be comparing L1 to L3 this time. So not L2, so that needs to be removed. So I'm going to go second stat plot. I'm going to go enter. This is still on. We still want the same type of graph. And I'm going to go down to that Y list, and that is now going to change to second L3. Okay, we're going to press enter. I don't need anything else. You from this point can just press zoom 9. So zoom 9. Always make sure you go to the bottom, and now you see the residual plot for airfare versus distance. And that'll help you determine if it is a linear equation is appropriate or it is not appropriate. Now, make sure again you are comparing L1 to L3, the residuals, okay? And reason being is, let's say I go ahead and change that up just for quick demonstration. Actually, nope, sorry. Second stat plot. I was at the correct spot. Got ahead of myself. And I go back and I change that to second L2. And this is where the mistakes happen. So make sure you know what you are actually comparing. Okay, I'm going to go enter to the very bottom, and now I'm going to press zoom 9, and we're going to go back to seeing our linear regression equation and the scatter plot. So again, it does matter. Make sure you know if you are comparing L1 and L3, whatever you are asked to do. And that's how you get your residual plot.